Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Now today my guest is somebody who I was told you've got to get this guy on the show, and I do get quite a few of those sort of requests, and I don't always know who these people are that I am being asked to have, and every now and again you go, look, okay, let's do this, and inevitably what happens is I learn something very much, the audience learns something, we all get on and we realise that we've got a lot to share. So my guest today is a gentleman called John Waters, who used to be, about 20 years ago, I believe he's retired now, a journalist with the Irish Times. He was also, before that, a music journalist, which might be the starting point for where we're going. How much of everything that we are told is really what they say it is? I want to explore that because I don't know about you, but there are so many rabbit holes and they can't all be true. And what if everything we've been told is upside down? How do you start again when you're like me in your 60s and you've spent 60 years going about your business thinking this was true, this was true, this was true? I've got nowhere to hang my coat anymore. John Waters, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Richard. Nice to be with you.
It's lovely to have you on the show and to meet you. We've been chatting briefly before the show, wondering where we were going to go with this. And this is a subject that I think actually doesn't get spoken about enough, because we are becoming, if you're on our side of the argument and you're sort of trying to point out this doesn't seem right, this doesn't seem right, you start getting vulnerable to anything that somebody suggests might be true and you don't know where to put it.
Yeah, I think that there's a movement within our freedom movement, if you like, that seems to be reductive now in the sense that it is attacking everything factual, or what we assume to be factual, and 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 seeking to expose it. It's almost as if there's a kind of a game, a kind of a deconstruction Olympics or something going on, that we have to sort of reduce everything, that nothing is real.
Yes.
And in a certain sense, if you believe that anything is real, that you are naive, and they send you messages saying, catch up, John, don't fall behind, and and it strikes me now that this is actually, in a certain sense, disintegrating reality, really, in the sense that everything now is up for grabs. Everything we lived through was
Yes.
not as it seemed at the time. Take, say, music. I mean, this is happening now. I mean, we know, and there are some good voices on these questions. I'm not disputing that there's a lot of evidence in some respects about, say, the Beatles story. There's a guy called Williamson, I think, in America, who has taken apart the early days and the timings of things, the timings of the songs emerging at the time that they were playing, 14 gigs a day in Hamburg and couldn't have had the
Yes.
time to write the songs and so on. And there's a lot in that. But what I find is that people are constantly moving in through the kind of pantheon, seeking to do the same with everybody else. And that alarms me greatly. Like if somebody was, for example, to, as it were, demonstrate to me that David Bowie was, a fraud, and that somebody, there was 14 guys in a room writing all those songs for him all those years, or something like that. I don't know what I would do. I mean, I would have to sit down with myself and say, well, what were you alive at all? What was your life worth? What is the meaning of all this? Because they're essentially taking away our history. And you actually then have to ask yourself, does that not actually suit the purposes of those who are trying to enslave us? Which I don't doubt at all, by the way.
Yes.
And the answer to that is, I think it does, And I think there is this increasing kind of ethic or ethos within our freedom movement to sort of, be the one to call out everything, and to call out everybody within the movement, of course, as well, while you're at it. And to see through everything. I see through things. See that you see, Richard, you don't see. You don't know. Richard, you don't really
No.
believe in that. You still believe in that. Oh my goodness. It's that. And I reminded of that quote of something from C.S. Lewis, which I tweeted last night only, about seeing through things. And he says, that the point of seeing through things is to see something through them. In other
Right.
words, you look out the window at the garden and you see the garden, right? But if you can see through the garden, then what then? It becomes
Yeah.
everything transparent becomes invisible. And he said that the result of this is that seeing through everything is the same as not seeing. And I have that sense now that the kind of discussion within our freedom movement is increasingly moving in that direction. Everything that happened, say, for example, the assassination of Trump or the attempted assassination of Trump there, like within minutes, there were
Yeah.
teams of conspiracy theorists on, drawing diagrams and telling us that this was all set up and that there was a blood bubble in behind his ear and all of this kind of thing. And I said, oh, well, then that means, nothing is real anymore, nothing. And therefore, what can we talk about? What can we think? What can we feel? This is the problem. I think that it's like, and it strikes me again that if these people who are setting out to basically demoralize us, I mean, they couldn't have hit on a better way of doing it than to take away our pasts.
Yes. And I mean, we were talking beforehand. You mentioned Mozart. That there's a theory that Mozart's material has been written by a committee of other people.
Yeah.
And we also hear the same with other
Beethoven, the same. Yes.
Yeah, Beethoven. But people like Churchill, Napoleon may not have existed. I had a chap on the show talking about Telsa. Was he really there? Did he really manage to get Tesla rather get all the patents and things and hold everything in his, and you start to sort of go, hang on a minute, that so all the things that you could hold on and anchor on and say, well, at least that bit's true, and then what can I link onto that little nail? How many lucky horseshoes can I put onto that? No, that nail doesn't exist either.
Yeah, you see, say take the Beatles. Like I grew up with the Beatles, and I remember those moments when we went to see Let It Be, for example, in the cinema, and that was a kind of an epic moment in my kind of adolescence. And you think, well, okay, that they're talking about they're in their studio, they're writing the songs, they're playing their riffs, they're trying things out. Is this all an act? And I kind of think, well, what are we going to do with our lives now? And then the second thought occurred to me, well, okay, even if this is true, if this were completely true, well, that means that the other guys wrote these great songs.
Yes.
So, okay, so can we now find out who these other guys were and understand their story and build a new culture where the old one was? I think we're going to have to do something like that. If we establish these things beyond doubt, because otherwise we just turn the past into an empty, ethereal kind of space.
But John,
nothing in it.
Can you imagine that you were writing such great music that you're giving it to somebody else and you don't get a damn bit of credit, that you never stand up and do, that's repeated ad nauseum across history, and all these people that no one's ever, it's like, it's like the 100 monkeys churning out amazing stuff, but you never see the monkeys themselves.
Yeah, I read somewhere about that these guys were so good that they actually did this stuff in their lunch hours. So maybe they had no respect for what they were doing. They were such geniuses in some other discipline, or some other art form or whatever. And this was just something that they kind of like condescendingly knocked out, as we say, while they're eating a sandwich. It's an interesting thought. But again,
it's kind of like Yes, it's kind of like the divine coming down saying, okay, I'll give you 5 albums. Here they are. Just write them down and give them to some of those human type creatures that you have, and you can all have a party.
Yes.
And yet there are plenty of talented people writing stuff who are not high up and don't have followers. And occasionally you'll go to a pub and somebody's singing. You're thinking, why the hell are you not made it? So it does seem strange that there would be other people, in suits sitting there going, oh yes, let it be, and writing all these lyrics.
And lest to be misunderstood, Richard, I mean, I'm as much, as we're a victim of all this as anybody else. I become interested in things. Like, I mean, for example, I saw you on with James Ellingpool, and he asked you where you stood on the Bowie question, the idea, is Bowie dead or alive? And I don't know if you're sure what he meant by that. But there is a story. And in fact, I was there at the very moment when this initiated. And this thought occurred to me when I saw the episode out of which this grew. It was on the day that Bowie died, or the day after Bowie died, on, I think, Sky News. And there was this guy on who was talking about Bowie. He was an A&R man, as they used to call him, for RCA Records. And he was talking about Bowie, whom he had known and worked with in really glowing terms, obviously. But then I was looking at this guy, and he had a very odd haircut, you know. But I said, "That's David Bowie."
Oh yes, I've seen that clip.
Yeah, Jack Stephen was his name,
And
and
they
I
said that he was, yeah, that's right. I've seen that clip.
and out of that, and I mean, he did look like Bowie. He could have been. He sounded like him a little bit. And of course, Bowie was an actor and a very good one. Uh, so you know, I'm not talking about this. I mean, I find this more and more, Richard, in the modern world, that I'm actually a victim of things and a critic of them at the same time. You know, it's kind of like a form of inevitable and necessary hypocrisy that you live with and in yourself all the time, because you're doing this, you're exploring these ideas, you're indulging in these kind of fantasies or whatever they would be, and yet you are kind of at some other level regretting that you have to do this, that you might actually prove something that will be greatly to your chagrin or your disappointment or whatever, you know. So that's really, I think, part of something that's happened to us in the last 2 years, which has other equivalents as well in the context of, you know, that I think very often, I think in the context I find myself in now, and I've been fighting this whole, you know, war against humanity. I've been fighting for humanity, as it were, on the side of humanity. Whether the humanity appreciates it or not, Richard, I don't know. But you know, it's you know, and I've often thought that I can understand something, I can accept it, I can, in a certain sense, believe it, but I don't fully emotionally connect with it, because it is, in a certain sense, at some part of my imagination, something impossible. Like for example, the idea that a named politician whom I've met and, you know, maybe went round on a canvas with one day when I was a reporter or whatever, is now involved in genocide.
Yes.
I can't reach that emotionally, even though in a certain sense I won't try to prove it wrong. I won't try to defend him, but I don't emotionally believe 100% that he could be doing this. And I try in the back of my mind to construct rationalizations, not to get him off the hook, but to get me off the hook of that
Right.
of that
Yes.
failure to be able to imagine this being 100% what they say.
Is that because a lot of our politicians, mostly to ordinary everyday people, are so far removed from their lives, they never meet them? It's far easier to sort of cast the aspersion that, oh, they're all in it. They're all up to their necks in it. When actually, perhaps they're in it to a degree, but they don't know how much they're in it. And they're, like all of us, have been
Yeah.
told some pack of lies that they're following, thinking, you know, you constituent of mine, you don't understand what I'm doing for you. And the constituent is sitting there going, yeah, but you don't understand what you're doing for me either.
Hmm. Yeah, there's something in that, Richard. I think that we can't really, you know, all of us, we have to be aware that this whole plot is so cleverly constructed that it kind of weaponizes all kinds of elements within human psychology to make people, whether it's guilt or cannot, you know, that there's necessary complicity. For example, in, you know, I think this is one of the things that happened with the you know, the in-arm pricks, let's say, that people, you know, there has been a lack of outcry, in my view, from people because of what has ensued. Particularly, I would say, or markedly, families of those who are affected, who don't seem to be clamoring for justice in the way that you might expect. And I think that for example, there's clear elements whereby maybe their complicity was appropriated at some point, and they have a certain degree of guilt about what happened because they maybe put pressure on the person involved to go along this road. And I think that kind of thing is built into the whole edifice. And so it's never quite the case that you can 100% say, well, in some cases, of course, you can. You can say, no, that he's definitely in on it 100%. But in many cases, you realize that actually these people were just as much duped as we were.
Yes.
And
I mean, self-preservation, you would think, if they really knew the big picture, they would be wanting the subterranean basements and the spaceships to other planets, or whatever it is that
yeah,
these really McNasties are up to. And yet they're quite happy to sit in their relatively large house and think, oh, it's fine, these people spraying the sky or putting fluoride in the water.
although interestingly, Richard, there's quite an exodus now from Irish political life in particularly in the governmental parties.
Is
In
there?
the last, they're not going to go for a lot of something like 50% in one instance is not going to go ahead to seek re-election. So there's clearly some sniffing of the coffee there. Uh, but I think in general, though, there is that thing. I mean, I have met politicians, who literally, and they're not good actors, so they couldn't be faking it, would be literally pushing me away from them, like, oh,
Yes.
no, don't come too close. Well, not that I would want to, but,
No.
uh, so all of these signals, I mean, they could be faked, of course, but, this is another thing, you see. I think we're being asked a lot of the time to discount our life experience of reading people.
Mm.
So you're told, oh, such and such is a shill. Richard Volb's clearly a shill.
Yes.
But then you watch Richard Volb and you think, no, he looks to me like he's completely natural. He looks like he's actually speaking sincerely and truthfully. And so, but yet they will insist. And I just think, well, no, we have to be able to use the apparatus we've developed for reading each other. Otherwise, we're doomed.
No, I totally agree, and it's amazing how you can have a conversation with one people and agree on 90% of the things, and one thing will trigger them to the point that suddenly it's like all of that you have in common just goes out, and they'll suddenly go, "Oh no, you're obviously a shill," and you think, "Blimey, if it's as easy as that,
Yeah.
then." The job of being a shill or a controlled opposition is really easy.
Yes.
It would certainly be nice to have the check every now and again.
Yeah, and of course, Richard, you know that you have to be very careful with the way you hold your hands in these interviews.
Oh my goodness! If you do any sort of yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
But this, I mean, that I find that fascinating that people will see things that they want to see. It's almost as if they're looking for them. I did before getting into any of this, I had a channel where I was looking at landscape heritage and nature, and Julia and I was going all over the place, and we happened to be in a charity shop, and Julia was looking for vintage clothes for a piece that we were doing, and we took a photograph of us in this with Julia in the vintage clothes. Behind us was a beige object. It's in a charity shop, so there's loads of objects, teapots and pictures and all this sort of secondhand stuff. And somebody had found this picture, because we'd posted it somewhere, and someone found this picture and said, oh, look, there's a pyramid behind Richard. That proves he's in with the Freemasons. And the thing was, down in the comments, somebody said, no, that's not a pyramid. It's a lampshade. And that's what it was, a beige lampshade. But somebody saw something and went, yes, that's the living. And you just think, my goodness, how many charity shops you're going to go into until you find the perfect pyramid in the right place so you could take a picture. But I just find it extraordinary how people they're almost wanting to seek something to pull the rug from under.
Oh yeah, I've had a few of those. I mean, there was one, for example, myself and my wife. There's an old photograph at a music festival, though, and this is before it has even started or anything like that. And my wife was waving to somebody, and her hand was kind of like, kind of like there was a slight division between two of her fingers, or something like that. And she was waving, and apparently that's the dead giveaway, that you're definitely Freemason. Only Freemasons do that, apparently.
So, something purely by accident. But the thing is, the people who do this, I don't think they're bad people. It's just they're what it is in something in their psyche is like they're so busy trying to find the truth that they're actually putting a lot of the truth into the wrong box or the wrong people. They're seeing signs where there really are no signs to be seen.
Well, that is true, Richard. But there's another dimension to that, which is that there's, as I say, this kind of like reductionist Olympics going on, whereby there's a competition on. And, you got to remember that, this is probably the first situation like this. I mean, for example, if you look at communism in the Soviet bloc or, whatever, like, didn't have the internet. They didn't have YouTube.
Social media.
Social media, right? So,
God.
people, the nature of the resistance took on a different form altogether. It tended to be artists and playwrights and people like that writing underground dramas and putting them on and producing semi-dat editions and so on, and passing them around the city to people in brown paper bags and so on. This has kind of created a different kind of atmosphere completely, where there's this daily, almost like moment to moment competition to be the one who's got the scoop, who's got the insight, who's got the kind of final say on something or other. And so there's a huge competitive dimension to this, which in a certain sense is kind of inimical to the spirit of revolution or resistance, in a sense, because that should be about being together, working together. And I think that there's a lot of competitiveness now which has crept into the freedom movement, which is actually, again, probably part of the plan.
Yes.
To create dissension and division, which it's absolutely doing.
And it's much easier for the globalists, the McNasties, the evil whoever, to let us do all the work than them to try and manipulate it. I mean, they can just use human nature. And they start the ball rolling. And my goodness, we're very good at carrying out the devil's work, aren't we?
Oh yeah, this is the thing. Like we seem to deliver to them exactly the kind of things they would want in order to achieve their ends. Whereas I think we actually, for that reason, need to regroup and say, well, we're not going to do that anymore.
Yes,
we're going to do something else, and then we'll see how they like it.
Yes, I mean, you take the story you were talking about, the Beatles, in which you have all these different rumours, other people are writing their music or whatever. What does that say then to all the hours of pleasure that people have had singing the Beatles music and going to tribute bands and all that? Does that suddenly mean, oh, I'm not really supposed to have enjoyed any of that? That was the devil's work. I'm not supposed to have enjoyed. How do I erase that from my memory and not actually embrace, I'm actually having a good time? I don't care who wrote it in the end.
That kind of resonates from me with something I've read recently. And it's the latest novel by the French writer Michel Houellebecq called Annihilation. And a core team in it is euthanasia. He's very much opposed to this. He's a very interesting character. But in one passage, he actually dwells on this idea that the reason, or whether it's the chicken or the egg is hard to say, but that he says that basically our societies have come to hate elderly people, that they've come to actually want to keep them away out of their sight. And he said that going along with that, therefore, is the idea of discounting and disparaging every achievement of humanity through their lives. In other words, there's no value. Like in the old days, an elderly person was venerated for what they had done, whether they were a politician or a musician or just a worker. Like I remember my father used to talk about somebody, and he would say he was a great worker. There was the highest praise that you could give as one man to another. Now it's like all of this is discounted, and he says youth is everything, even though youth has never achieved anything.
Well, look at what's the name of that woman who was going on, the young girl, Thunberg. They put her on a pedestal, and they're sort of, when she was 12, 13, sort of saying, well, what's your global warming advice for
yes.
Like, and she's got no knowledge at all. Yes. And yet she's hosting or being pushed as the sort of the poster girl of it. And the scientists who spent and devoted their lives to the question of whether it's possible for the man-made global warming to be a thing are just cast aside.
Yes.
Because Greta says that, it's our future. And so therefore she's right.
Well, that seems to be, again, part of their plan, that they can, again, erase the record of every human being who has lived, and therefore disallow their opinion about things because they're old now, and
yes.
So on. And again, that's literally something that it's fantastical in one sense that people could A, conceive of this, and B, implement it. Never mind to say successfully. but
Yes.
they are doing it. I mean, I had this very strong feeling, Richard, about 5 or 6 years ago. I was in hospital. I was very ill back in 2019, and I spent a lot of time in hospitals in Ireland and in Spain because I got a relapse when I was over there. And I started to see something that hadn't really dropped with me before, which was the way that the demeanor of older people in these situations, and then the demeanor of other people towards them. Like I would be sitting in a corridor waiting to go in for a scan or something, and I would see a gurney or something coming down the corridor with maybe 2 or 3 men behind it pushing, and they would all be laughing and talking among themselves. And the person, like the elderly person, would be sitting bolt upward, right, in the gurney, staring straight ahead.
Yeah.
Nobody looking, nobody speaking to this person. And they would wheel it down, then they would turn into a doorway and the thing would disappear. And I had this sort of rising feeling in myself. There's something radical happening. There's some change. And then this is when I read Hellbeck's book, I realized he had the same intuition, perhaps around the same time, that, at a certain point in your life, far from being venerated and celebrated for the achievement of what you've done, that you're actually a non-person and nobody wants to look at you and nobody wants to talk to you. And it's the ultimate kind of loneliness. And it seems to me that it's very much, if you wanted to create a culture in which, old people would, as it were, constructively dismiss themselves from existence, this would be the way to do it. That you would make life so intolerable, so miserable
Yes.
for people, so that their whole lives they're wiped off the whiteboard or the blackboard, and they are now just bodies sitting on gurneys or in beds.
Yes,
Waiting
useless
to die.
eaters, as they like to call us. And I suppose technology is also responsible for that. When you think that the technology, the youth and the kids are being brought up with it, they know it intrinsically. I mean, my dad, he's no longer with us, but my dad used to call me up and say, Dad, Richard, can you come over and program the VHS recorder? And he was in his, I suppose then he was in his 70s, and he didn't really understand how to do it. And then as he got older, all technology was a huge challenge. And now we have a world in which to park the car, you've got to go and have a mobile phone. You've got to have the right app. It's got to be charged. You've got to find the thing, and you pay on your phone, which is very confusing for a lot of old people who still use pounds, shillings, and pence, for the want of a better word, coins. And they don't understand this digital stuff and send an email. I mean, many of them are getting on board with it, and it is quite amazing. But that's a real way of separating the generations when you get to the point, well, I don't really want to understand this digital technology. What's digital ID and CBDCs?
That's a very real point. It's really good. And there's another aspect to that too, I think, Richard, which is that, and I'm nearly 70 now. I'll be 70 next May. In fact, I'm more than 70 years on the planet because I was conceived, 70 years
Because you were conceived.
and 6 weeks ago, actually.
Yeah. Oh, right. Well, congratulations.
Thank you very much. I must say I recommend this because it's a really good way of avoiding a big birthday. You can have it beforehand. Announce it to yourself beforehand. They say, no, I've been 70 for the last year. What are you talking about? Don't make a fuss.
Yeah.
But here's the point I was making, though, Richard, is that many of the people, I used to be a columnist with the Irish Times, a weekly column, and other newspapers at different times as well. But for them, I was 24 years. So I had a huge following among a certain kind of people who, that time in Ireland, like, people were different. They were very engaged with political affairs. Right. And they would stop me in the street and argue with me and things like that, in a very good humoured way, mostly. Not like now. They don't. Good humour is gone now. If they argue with you now, you better start running. But the thing is that those people are still out there, but they're still watching the old media. They don't know where I am or anybody like me, and I never hear from them. So those people would be probably the first to understand, to grasp what's been happening if they could only get the rudimentary information and insights and hear discussions. But they don't hear them because they don't know how to get on the internet. Most of them don't.
Yeah.
And that's, again, a thing that seems to me to be factored in. this is what I say. No matter where you look, you see these little pockets of cunning that have been kind of weaponized to the same cause of enslaving the human race and preventing us from reaching critical mass of consciousness that we would need as a race, as a people, whatever, and keeping us. They've done it now 4.5 years, nearly 5 years. They've been doing this, and still, I don't feel that we're. I won't say any closer to that moment, but that I don't feel that we're much closer to that moment. So certainly nothing like I would have imagined.
And of course, we're the ones that are awake to all of this. I go around. People have asked me since doing the YouTube channel to do talks, which is very odd, really, because they see me every day and then they ask me to talk about the same old stuff. But the audience that turn up are 50 plus. They're all from the analog world, so they're all of a certain generation, and they sort of are aware of stuff, but they are on the wrong side of the generation, if you like. If you're talking about, well, we want to get back to the land and we want to grow our own food, and you think, actually, if you go out, there you are at 65, you go out for a couple of hours in the garden, that's one thing, but a 12-hour day on a farm, actually trying to produce enough food to feed people, is going to kill you. Because you're not trained to do it. We've had such sedentary lives, and we've been sitting in front of screens, and we've been sitting in front of computer terminals or whatever it is on the whole, or in call centers. We're not used to this sort of old-fashioned "let's get out there and save the world" type thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, I've been through that experience for the last 2 years, because I used to, as a young guy, as a teenager, and I used to have a garden and so on, and grow vegetables, and I did that intermittently through my life. I'd given it up for a long time because getting on and so on, but I took it up again about 4 years ago, and I started to build a garden. No dig, obviously. Less digging the better, but the weather has got really disastrously bad over the last 15 months, which of course is not a natural phenomenon. Let's be honest. Let's go back to our conspiracy.
Absolutely.
But I find that I'm actually struggling now to stay on top of this project. It's so, again, it's like I'm just too old and too tired to be doing it every day, or to do it. And what happens is then a wet spell comes and everything gets ruined, and then I say, So there's so many aspects to this that it strikes me, if there was a mainstream conversation about what's going on, for all the flaws of the mainstream, it would be much more if it was just simply approached in the way the mainstream approaches things, which is in some ways banal and sort of, old-fashioned and, clunky. At the same time, it would be much more informative for people than actually the alternative media's version of what's happening, in my view.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because when I started out, I didn't really know very much, so it was all questions, and I was sort of perceived to be like the Alan Tishmarsh of the conspiracy theory, because there I sat with my waistcoat and my cravat, sitting there going, why is the nice, kind, benevolent government seem to be working against us? Everything seems to be anti-human. And this was sort of my original thing. But then as I sort of fell down these rabbit holes and the audience were growing with me, I couldn't continue with the sort of naive approach, because they were expecting me to expose something else. And so you move on from that station, and there's a void there for somebody else to come in and be all very affable and nice and very mainstream-like, so that new audience can take that as a stepping stone from what the mainstream media are going, oh, he seems, fairly reasonable, enjoyable, to some of these extreme ones that you see on Rumble and wherever, where they're incredibly angry and they're showing you very harsh stories that most people are not yet ready for.
That's right. That's right. Now, that's a very interesting point as well. And I think that, it does strike me, that, the demeanor of the interviewer in the mainstream was always that of the skeptic and the kind of the one who asked the naive questions, the kind of the primary obvious questions, and that works in a certain way. It works very well with people who are completely uninitiated, it brings them in. And in a certain sense, there's almost nowhere now you can go on the internet to find that kind of treatment of what's happening.
Mm.
That has somebody in, and the interviewer is approaching them like kind of an idiot in a sense, saying, "I don't know anything. Tell me." Like I remember one of the
Well, I
best.
do have a bit of that approach, and I'm sure most of
Yeah,
my
you
audience
do.
would say I'm a bit of an idiot, so I'm
Yeah,
happy with
but
that.
one of the best questions I've ever heard from a journalist was a guy on radio here in Ireland years ago, when he wouldn't have, and you knew that he would have done that. He would do this when he wouldn't have read the brief or he wouldn't have a brief, and he
Yeah.
just have somebody on and he would say, "Tell us what you know," and then he would just leave, I suppose, and go home to
Yeah.
bed.
Well, that's kind of pretty much my approach in the beginning because I didn't know very much, and then people were coming on, and someone would say, "Well, do you know, I can channel aliens," and you go, "Okay, I'm going to keep a straight face here and let you get on with that
Yes,
because I have no idea whether that's true or not, but my audience can make up their own mind. It's not
yes,
necessarily for me to say, oh, well, that's rubbish. Of course, don't be so stupid." Um, and my audiences, when I meet them, have been very nice. They say, we do like the way you approach it because you're not trying to shut anyone down, or you're not trying to guide the conversation in any set direction.
yeah. No,
Because half the time I don't know, and I'm still trying, as you said right at the beginning, I'm trying to work out, was Mozart really one man or a committee? Was Napoleon? Was all of these others? Did it exist? And also, if it didn't, what does that do for my history
yes.
and
But
everything I've ever felt here?
to me, the important thing is that these questions remain open. That we
Yes,
don't go on and say, "Oh, come on, everybody knows that," then okay, well then we'll just move on to another subject. Why can't we explore the subjects as if it were still an open question? And well, what's the evidence? And like if you ask for evidence now on a question that's already decided by, as it were, the Politburo of the resistance, you are regarded as somebody who's either a dullard or a shill.
yes.
But therefore anybody watching the encounter learns nothing.
No, and I mean it's very difficult. So if I was talking about geoengineering, and I said, and I admit I refer to these trails in the sky as chemtrails, but if I would be open to somebody saying, no, Richard, you're absolutely wrong, that is a fallacy, let me come on the show and tell you what's really going on, I would be open to that. But I
Yes.
know, as you just so rightly said, I know that video would be slated by the majority because they'd be going, "Why have you got that shill on to divert us from?" I say, "Well, it's not about that. It's about let's listen to the other side.
Yeah.
We can still make up our own minds. We can
Yes.
still disagree with him,
And
but let's listen."
next week you can have somebody on who takes an entirely different view of it.
Yes,
That's what journalism used to be, you know. But it's like the mainstream has gone one way in one
yes,
extreme where it only has one side of the story, and
and we've gone
and
the
the
other.
alternative has gone the other way, and it has only one side of the story, and in the middle there's this huge gaping hole that nobody will fill.
It is difficult, therefore, to get someone from one side to go on the other because they know what they're letting themselves in for.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not going on that Richards show because his audience will decimate me if I say actually it is just contrails and it's to do with the temperature and the depth, or it's paraffin or it's fumes from the whatever it is that they want to put over, and so they don't want to come over, and so we've as you say we have atomized ourselves by being too, in a way, too extreme on our views.
Yeah, well, you see, it is a terrible tragedy what has happened to the media, the mainstream media, the fourth estate, which has really behaved disreputably in all of this. And that of course, is the most fundamental betrayal of humanity that has existed in a certain sense in this, because
Yes.
without that, the rest wouldn't be possible, really. They wouldn't
No.
have been able to pull this off if they hadn't been able to buy the media. And you know, that has all kinds of effects as well. That I notice in the context of public apprehension of understandings. That people. You see, I think we kind of didn't really fully understand. I'm sure certain experts in the field did, but we didn't really generally understand that. The way we take in information is more complex than simply I saw it in the paper, I
Yeah.
heard it on the news. You need to hear things several times like there's an old saw in journalism. The three rules of journalism is: first you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, then you tell them what you've told them. And there's some truth in that. That you start
Yes.
off telling, well, this is what the story is about. Here's the story. Now, this is in some way an analysis or whatever. You're told what it was and what it meant. And if they remove one or other of those elements, the story doesn't stick in the consciousness of the people. And that has been happening. I've been watching that happening now for the last 4.5 years, that people are if they can selectively decide which things they want people to remember, and they'll emphasize those in that way. But the others, they'll put them in on page 17, the bottom left-hand corner, and then that's it. You say to somebody, did you see that in the paper? Oh, I thought I saw something. Yeah, what was it? Yeah, it doesn't go in, So there's a lot of that stuff going on, a lot of trickery that we never had occasion to think about it before. I was interested in this is another aspect. I was a journalist, as I say, for 35 years. And I'm not sure I would agree with James Delingpole's analysis fully, in the sense that he seems to now think that the entire thing was always corrupt and that it was always being used for these nefarious purposes. That's not my memory, by and large, of what it was like. Now, I took on board this thing about the anniversaries, and that had never occurred to me before. And there is an obsession in media with anniversaries. He's right about that. But looking back, still, I would say that probably 90% of what we were engaged in was straight up. It was genuine. It was like we're talking about what happened yesterday. You're either telling the news or you were reflecting on the news. Then that changed completely, in my view, in the spring of 2020, when in fact nothing could be trusted. But you see, the point was that people reading the newspapers, who had been buying the newspapers, had no way of knowing that this change had occurred, unless they were tuned in. I mean, my position was in the beginning, I kind of believed it for about 2 weeks in this pandemic idea.
Yes.
And I was going around with plastic gloves and this kind of stuff, and then I heard a few things. Somebody pointed me in the right direction, and I looked and said, "Oh, this is completely crazy." So, but most people didn't have that opportunity because they were in that bubble, and many of them are still in it. And so, the alternative media, you see, needs to, because it has no mainstream audience or very little mainstream audience. It's out there, it's on the fringe, and it has its own audience. And yeah, you're right, there are different pockets. Older people, I find in general, people who turn out are older people, more younger people now than there used to be. Yes. But you're not getting the bulk of the mainstream people. They're still not tuning in. They're still very, it's not that they're skeptical, they don't even think about it. It's obvious what happened. There was a pandemic, there was a terrible virus, many people died, blah, blah, and so on. And the vaccine didn't quite work, but it was obviously not in any way dangerous.
Yes, it wasn't a deliberate thing to get rid of people.
Yes, and so that's really, given the conditions we're in, and the level of corruption and the level of money being pumped into media by governments, it's almost impossible to take that down from the outside. And you can't get in to do it. I mean, in many respects, if one of us could get on a mainstream program, like say Newsnight or the Late Late Show in Ireland or whatever, like it will be, for like 40 minutes, you just blow the whole thing out of the water. You would revolutionize the country in that time, because you could actually make a very plausible case that people would say, yeah, that's true, that's true, that's true. That's what I thought.
But would that be enough? Knowing how advertising works, that the drip message of constantly, I mean, even that fizzy drink that I don't want to mention the name, that everybody will know is a dark fizzy drink that comes out at Christmas, that is bad for the teeth and all the other things, and goodness knows. They need to advertise still to be top of people's mind. And as you just said then, for 40 minutes you could make a great case about whatever the subject is, and people could go, bloody hell, that's amazing. But then suddenly the next item and the next item, it's like people's short-term memory seems to be have gone, oh, I was going to write to my MP about it and say you must watch this program, but now I've just so now it's Strictly
Yeah.
Come Dancing is on and something else.
Well, there is that, and you're dead right about the short-term memory. In fact, I was reading a book very recently called "The Indoctrinated Brain" by Dr. Michael Niels, and he talks about this, that many of the dimensions of this whole campaign have been constructed in order to wipe the memory of the viewers of TV. I mean, for example, he says one of the examples he gives is, that kind of, you know, uh, uh, litany of death that used to happen on the news in the evenings back in the spring of 2020. I didn't watch it, but I was aware, I'd heard about it. He said that was a deliberately constructed thing, that when you're tired and if you're forced to kind of contemplate complex or whatever things, that what actually happens, your brain isn't up to it. So what it does is it starts to erase space from your memory.
Oh, right.
And you start to use those almost like old videotapes that are being recorded over. And all of this kind of thing, again, is part of the cunning, little pockets of cunning that you find in all of these things. But this is what I mean, is that the media is such a monolith. It's almost the only problem in a certain sense. It's the only democratic problem, really, when you come right down to it, because none of the other elements could behave as they're behaving if the media were honest. I mean, if you had a media that would put you on as a politician on the front page tomorrow if you told a lie or misrepresented something or went back and contradicted yourself or whatever it was, if they, like in the old days when, the job of journalists was, as it were, to bring down the government every week, if that ethic still persisted, this would never have happened.
Right. Yes. But it's so far from that now. The days of Robin Day and those sort of journalists who would be keen to sort of uncover stuff. They're very keen not to uncover anything that is somewhat controversial.
Can I ask you, Richard, about your own view? Because this is an interesting aspect of it. Like, what is your feeling when you're in this situation now? Do you think at some level that we're doomed? Do you think at some level, no, the cavalry is coming? It's like a Hollywood movie where in Act 2, Act 3 will start in January, and then we'll see what happens. What is your general demeanor in the face of these appalling events?
I have to say that my general demeanor is very optimistic, and I do sort of take a slightly tongue-in-cheek about all of this. I don't know why. I have no grounding or basis to pin that on. I'm not really the cavalry's just over the corner type person, but I do feel that it is down to us as responsible people. But also, I mean, one of the things I've done, I suppose, which really helps, is I don't have a television. I have no idea what the Labour government are doing. I don't watch any of the news. I mean, all I heard was he got in. I don't know what goes on in the Middle East. I don't know about the Ukraine. I stopped interested in all of that. And the only information I get are the emails and some of the videos. And I don't get time to watch the videos that people send me. And if there's any hint that it's going to be negative and it's, I don't know, about child trafficking or about, the truth of the dark forces, how they got going, it's kind of, I've got enough of a handle on that. I don't need to know anymore. I actually, despite doing this work, I like to have a laugh. My partner and I read books to each other in the evening. We sit round a fire. We have a very simple life, and moving away from the technology. I mean, I've got lights in here, and I set up this studio well before I was doing all of this stuff, just as an entertainment thing, and so it's just happenstance that I've got this where it is, but I like to go for walks and get back into nature. And so there's something that just tells me it's going to be okay. And also the other side of it is I think that we're all taking it somewhat too seriously, and it's the fear that's pushing us down the path. Now, I may be wrong, and somebody may come along and put me in the street and says, you're going in a FEMA camp, mate, because of all your work, or we're going to shoot you and execute you. But my personal feeling is that that's just this physical body. That's this this iteration of me, but actually they won't really be able to do anything to me other than maybe causing some pain and what have you, because I think the me that's stuck in this body at the moment isn't here for that. It's not solely here, that there's other things.
Yes, that's very, very interesting. I'm somewhat similar to that. I wouldn't necessarily express it in those precise ways, but
I'm sure you wouldn't.
I do have that sense of optimism, but I'm not sure where it comes from, because
No.
the objective evidence in support of it is pretty thin on the ground.
I mean, it is like a game. I feel like every morning we're back in this game again.
Yes,
and yet it does feel that there's an element of it which is unreal, that it's
see,
not. That isn't the real deal.
There is an element, though, whereby, growing up as a Christian in Christian societies, watching Hollywood movies, whatever it is, reading novels, which by and large kind of come out okay in the end. When you're in the cinema, and there's something really frantic going on the screen, and you're really, you're almost behind the scene in front of you, in terror or in apprehension of what's going to happen to your hero.
Yes.
Then you think, oh, it's to be okay. In another half an hour, the Clint Eastwood will arrive and he'll sort us all out. Whatever. So there's that. I think there's that trope is in there in all of us. In our society.
Yes.
And we kind of think. I did an interview there a short time ago with Matt Letizia, the footballer, and
yes.
He's 56, and I was saying to him, do you feel that we could get to a point in our lives? I mean, I said, you're 56 and I'm nearly 70. He said, that we will actually look back on this and say, oh, look, what were we worried about? It's all sorted now, and he says, yes, I do. He says, well, I do for me. He said, I'm not sure about you.
Charming.
No, it was a joke. It was a good joke.
Of course.
But I understand that kind of sense that we are programmed to believe that somehow or another it'll be okay, which maybe is a kind of a way of explaining a lot of the other stuff we've been talking about, as kind of like that. Well, we're just here to kind of keep watch, to talk about this, and it's very important that the alternative media does in just being there and speaking, you and me and all of the rest of us, speaking in the truth, about what's happening, and showing that we do care and we do know and we are watching. I think that's very important. But ultimately, some other force, whether we're religious or not, some other force will actually resolve this.
Yeah.
And, there are certain theories about that in relation to, say, the American presidency, for example. Now, this can be a very unpopular one at the moment, because there's a lot of skepticism about Mr. Trump. But nevertheless, there is that old narrative, about the storm and the Great Awakening and all that. And we don't know. I mean, who knows? I mean, I don't discount anything. I just take it on board. I take the metaphor I've been using since this started was of the dry stone wall. That I have to help my uncles to build their dry stone walls and down the west, and it's like that, because you're building, you have a heap of stones behind you, and you're building the wall, and you try a stone out, it doesn't fit, but you don't throw it in the bin and the skip. You say leave it aside, and you find another one. And then tomorrow that other stone, and it fits. When you put it in, it fits perfectly, and that way you continue to build your consciousness, your awareness of what's happening. And that at the end of the thing, the wall will be complete. You don't know how. It seems impossible because you haven't got enough of the right kind of stones or whatever. Yeah. But I think that's kind of the way that, as a journalist, I've always worked, is to kind of try everything, never close anything off, never say that, I don't agree with that. I don't want to hear that. Just open your mind, open the mic, and speak.
Yes, I mean, I certainly go along with the fact that in the movies, they do like to, we're told they like to tell us what's happening, and we can see all these things in old movies being reflected back at us, and you go, oh yes, they're going to do this, and they're going to do that, and they're going to do the other. But the one good thing about the movies is, on the whole, about at least 95% of movies, the good guys win.
Yeah.
And so I just think, well, if they were continually making movies that the good guys didn't, well, of course, no one would go and watch it, because we all like to have a bit of hope. But it's almost like, well, if it to me, it's sort of like, well, okay, if you're on the side of truth and freedom and honesty, and you're integral, you're honest to yourself, and you're as truthful as you can be, then somewhere along the line, you're going to win. At
Yeah,
least that's what I'm clinging on to. I don't
yeah,
know that Mozart was there, or Nelson, or Napoleon.
yeah,
But the one thing I can cling on to is I know what I know to be true, at least in my own life.
yes.
And I'm not really expressing myself terribly well, but there's something honourable that you can cling on to and go, well, I've done the best I can,
That's
and
right.
I haven't sold out, or didn't take
Exactly.
the
There's nothing
the
more I can do.
yeah.
I just want to tell you the bad news here, Richard, is that they have a word for what you're expressing there. They're called
Hopium,
hopium. Our
hopium,
friends,
yeah,
the hopium. But
yeah,
yeah, but you see, but I'm like that, and when I look at when you look at history, and you look at the fact that we're here, we're
yes.
talking to each other, we're not crying,
Yeah,
we're
well,
not.
exactly. We're having a laugh,
Yeah,
and even if it is hopium, I'll go to my grave at least optimistic, rather than spend the next 10, 20 years, or however long we got, 10 minutes, they might be at the door tomorrow,
yeah.
in negative fear. At least
Well,
one can live one's life with your vibration uppermost.
Well, this is the thing now that I was just reflecting on the last couple of days in relation to the American election. And it's this idea, this thing about the white hats. It's a
Yeah,
kind of one of those stories, and that there's an alternative, Davos, as it were, in which the good guys are sitting around and they're waiting for the moment which is coming. It's imminent, probably early next year, they say now, in which they will move and all the guys will all end up in Gitmo, right? They're
yes,
going, all the entire Democratic Party of the United States of America will be in Gitmo, right? Now, here's the point, though, that when I look back to the early days of this whole episode in the spring of 2020, that was my instinct immediately. I went to court with a friend of mine, another former journalist, mainstream journalist, who to challenge the lockdown in Ireland. And of course, we were kicked around the place for 2 years and then told to get stuffed, as predictably.
mm.
But that's beside the point. The point was that when we first decided to do it, I was very reluctant myself. I don't need this. I've been ill, blah blah.
Yeah,
But at the same time, I said, well, if nobody else is going to do it, I'm going to do it. But I thought I reassured myself immediately with the thought, well, look, there's going to be loads of more people wanting to do this. It's obvious. This is crazy. This is mad.
yes,
You can't do this. You can't do this. You can't tell people you can't go down the street any more than 2 kilometers. That's crazy. That didn't happen.
yes,
And here's the thing that it struck that's one of those puzzles in me that I can't figure out. Where are all those people that I grew up with who talked about democracy and justice and freedom and truth and all those things? They've got to be out there somewhere. And that's why ultimately I kind of sneakily believe in the idea of the white hats, that they're just biding their time.
mm.
And this is my hopium. This is my hope.
Well, I think it's a very sensible thing that people express that, because it may, even if it didn't exist, that there was no white hat Davos, the people in Davos don't necessarily know it doesn't exist.
That's
And
right.
so they may well be going, my God, there's a whole bunch of these white hat peoples that we didn't know about. And so they're so busy worried about a non-existent white hats coming in that it's almost, it puts them in fear, which would be
Yes.
a lovely, lovely irony to
It's a
finish them
nice
off.
it's a nice feeling to put you to sleep at night, isn't it? That those guys
Yes.
are trembling in their
Trembling in
boots.
their quake, going, oh, they're waking up. They know too much. We can't
Yes.
move quick enough. John, we're coming to the end of the sort of slotted hour that I like to have for these conversations. I do appreciate. I wasn't quite sure where we've gone with our conversation or where we were going to go, but I think what we've been saying is actually very useful for people to think about how much of the rabbit holes is all true, how worrying the stuff is, and is it overtaking our life to the point that we're just staying too extreme and not really edging a little bit back to say, hang on a minute, have we lost hold of everything?
Yes, I mean, I don't want to discourage people from speculating or from going down rabbit holes. That's not the point. The
No.
point is really to carry these things lightly and test them. But nevertheless, don't dismiss more positive possibilities.
Yes.
As you just said,
Yes.
that maybe even the involution of one of those things will be enough to cause those guys to lie awake at night in Davos or wherever they are, sleepless, pacing the floors, worrying that Richard Bulbs and John Waters are onto them and we're coming to get them.
Well, that is a good place to leave it, and I'm sure they are absolutely, you know, bricking themselves, visiting the little room frequently in the fear that you and I have stumbled onto it all. John, it's
Yes.
been an absolute pleasure. Where can people find where you work, where you write and stuff?
Um, I'm on Substack as John Waters Unchained. So that's johnwaters.substack.com. And I'm also on Twitter as John Waters Unchained. But I'm being shadow banned mercilessly by Elon Musk never got to open the Irish file. So there's people in that Dublin office who are behaving as if you know
All right.
the old guard never died. But
Yes.
so that's where you'll find me. But Substack primarily, I post there every twice a week, and I do articles and videos, interviews, and so I'll be putting up this interview at some point, I guess, in the next whenever you publish, if you do.
I will. I will. I will. I will certainly will. Well, I'll put the in the description all the sort of links to get to you. Thank you so much. A really enjoyable conversation.
Thank
So,
you.
and thank you to the viewer who suggested you. And that's something that I do enjoy. Because you're discovering new people all the time. And that's been my journey for the last 2 years,
Thank you, Richard.
discovering all these amazing people. So there we are. John Waters, thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard. Much obliged to you. Thank you.
I will be back with more monologues and more wonderful guests, so do stay tuned. But in the meantime, from John and I, thank you so much for watching, gentle listener, sitting there nervously wondering what the hell's going on. And we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.